Hi everyone, and welcome to our video about your report structure. The key thing I want to emphasize throughout these videos is that a key message is really important for your report. So you actually need to have a think as a group about what is your key message. When you've done the work, have a meeting and talk about what overall is going to be your key message. This can really help you to work out an appropriate structure for your report, in particular what to focus on in each of the sections. Now, Jochen has given you a set of instructions for the report, which is really helpful in looking at what are the particular questions that he wants you to answer, how many marks are allocated, and how long do each of the sections need to be. Now, the word counts there are maximum, so keep that in mind. You don't have to write that many words in each of the sections. You can write fewer if you like. I've actually taken these sections and had to think about how you might actually structure that in a report. So you might think of it as being like a kind of typical report where you have an introduction. So first of all, talking about what is your research question, what are you trying to do? Do make sure that you give enough information so that your tutors understand. So they might not be experts in your particular question, so you need to explain in enough detail what you're doing so that they can follow it. You also need to explain why is this question interesting and important, and that might refer to some of the literature. But do keep in mind that there's actually going to be a section that's quite substantial about a literature review, where you do give an overall summary of what is the state of art regarding your research question, and you boil it down to focus on 2 or 3 most relevant papers that motivate your particular research question. Then have a think about this next section as being one that talks about your aims, your approach, and some of your findings, where you talk about what have you actually done. So what is it that you're trying to do? What steps have you taken? How did you approach it? What worked? What didn't work? Why did you take those steps? And in there, you can also talk about the team distribution of work. So who did what? Why did you allocate those particular tasks to those team members? And then you continue on by talking about what were your outcomes. What were the results, both positive and negative? Jochen's not expecting that all of the results are going to be positive. He's expecting that a great many of them will give you some stumbling blocks and things like that you have to think through and explain what your reasoning is for your proposed next steps. So do make sure that you spend enough time talking about what worked, what didn't work, and why do you think they worked or didn't work. Then you have a section that talks about your next steps. So if your research question was a little bit unsuccessful, so if your results were negative, then what could you do to fix them? What could you do next to try and address those problems? Or if you were able to answer that particular research question, how could you extend it? What could you do next? What would be a relevant question to ask next? Then finally, wrap up with a bit of a reflection on what have you learned overall from this project. What did you find? And what would you do differently in hindsight? So what would you do if you were to do this project again? So that's essentially your overall structure for the report. Now, the key thing is that you really focus as a team on what's the main problem that you're being asked to solve, and what are you supposed to write about when it comes to your key message. Now, it's important that every assignment has a key message. So with this report, you might think of putting your key message in the introduction as well as in your concluding sections. So let's have an example. The example that I have here is answering the question, identify a current limitation in AIA, develop a strategy to address that particular limitation. So we're going to use a real example. I've modified it a bit for these examples. So as a thesis statement or as a key message, this one is a little bit broad because it talks about being rife with problems, but it doesn't tell me which problems they are. It also doesn't tell me what the author tends to do. So the next example is one where it's telling me a bit more about the actual problems. So the fact that AIA is good at identifying and labeling concrete things, but less good at labeling the concepts, etc., generated by the images. But it still doesn't tell me what the authors are going to do. So do make sure that you have something like this in your introduction for your report, where you say your key message, which is what are the exact problems and what is it that you are going to do. So this is the best example of the lot because it actually tells us the problems up here and what are they going to do. So do make sure that you include that kind of key message in your introduction. Now, in terms of the core components of your report, do think of it as having a section that talks about why you did this task, then how, and then what you actually found and why is that meaningful. So all of those sections help you to address that key message, help you to show why are you asking this particular research question, what motivates it, what approach is most appropriate for it, and with your findings, do you think they answer your research question or not, and why? Okay, so that wraps up our video about the report structure. Next, we have a video about writing the elements, so looking at introductions and paragraphs and so on. You can actually get advice from us about your report structure. So you could book an appointment as a group to come and see a writing coach or a learning advisor and have a Zoom appointment, and we'll give you feedback and talk with you about your questions about your report. Okay, this is the example that we used for the report structure, and I'll also be using this in the next video.